Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are all doing really good. Today I'm here to talk about what I think is one of the coolest models of instrument in rock and roll history, and that's the Fender Bass VI. It's one of the lesser known, I would say, offerings in the Fender catalog, but I just think it's insanely cool. I'll talk a little bit about its history and give you a couple of sound samples and talk about how I use it here in the studio. Let's get to it. So first I'm going to give you a quick rundown of how the switching system works on the Bass VI. So if you can see on the camera here, there are four switches, and they toggle up and down. The first three switches correspond to the pickups, and the fourth switch is a high pass filter, essentially. And so when that's engaged, when it's up, it's engaged, right? And it's turned on, it will scoop out a lot of the low end frequencies, and it makes it more of a trebly and mid-range sort of sound. So first of all, normally I play without the high pass filter engaged. I like having that warmth of the low end, and then in the mix, if I want to, if I need to cut out some of those lows, I can do that. But for the purposes of recording, I tend to leave that off. So before I go any further, I'm playing this through my Fractal Axe-Fx 3, and I'm using a Roland Jazz Chorus 120 model. So just a really nice, clean amp model, no distortion, it's not adding a whole lot of color to that sound, just a fairly clean, solid state model. So that is the neck pickup by itself. Right? So now let's engage the middle pickup. So this is neck and middle. Now let's hear all three. So all three are on at the same time. Not dramatically different, but turning on the bridge pickup adds a little bit of high-end frequency to it. And this is one of my favorite positions, actually, just using the neck and the bridge together. Now to give you an idea of how it sounds with that high pass filter engaged, I'll turn that fourth switch on here. And again, this is just using the neck and the bridge. So not only does a lot of that low end frequency drop out, but it seems like there's a lot of volume that drops out as well. Like I say, I rarely, if ever, utilize that particular feature. And then in terms of the other controls, there's a master volume and a master tone. Very similar in nature to the Jaguar. Now I'm going to play a little bit with the compressor engaged. I find that the compressor tightens up the sound of this instrument quite a bit, particularly when you're playing in some of the lower registers. On the bass strings, it can sound really kind of flubby. You wouldn't mistake that for the tone of a P bass or a Jazz Master. That would sound much tighter and punchier with those pickups. I don't exactly know how to explain it, but something about these, it's either the pickups or the scale length, but it tends to feel very spongy in terms of the string tension, and that sponginess kind of comes out in the sound. But if I turn on a compressor, it will tighten up that low end and it gives it a little bit more punch. Here's with the compressor on. I tend to play with that compressor on almost all the time. I just find that it's something that just sort of helps with the overall sound of this instrument. One of the things that I think is challenging from a sonic perspective is you've got an instrument that has such a broad sonic range, and just differences in terms of size of the strings, right? I mean the high E feels very similar to like the low E on a guitar. That's a fairly high note for a bass instrument, but it goes all the way down to low E, right? And I don't know if it's the electronics or the pickups or what, but without a little bit of compression to even things out, I find that the volume and the kind of the sonic profile of this instrument is a little challenging to record with and to mix with. But with the compressor, it just sounds really, really nice. Now let's add a couple of effects. I think this instrument sounds really good with some delay and some chorus to it, right? A very slight delay and a slight chorus. So as I mentioned, Fender introduced this in 1961, and I think that they discontinued that initial run sometime in the mid-70s. I think it was 74, 75. It wasn't a super popular instrument, I don't think, in terms of overall volume of sales, but it was played by quite a few high-profile people of that era. You can hear it on a lot of Beach Boys records. If you've had a chance to watch the really excellent Beatles documentary, Get Back, you'll see a Bass VI played quite a bit in those sessions. In the Beatles case, I think they primarily used it on songs where Paul would play the piano, and they still wanted a bass of some sort in the track. And Paul being a lefty, John Lennon and George Harrison, weren't able to play the left-handed Beatle bass. And I'm guessing that that sort of a six-string baritone guitar was probably easiest for them to adapt as guitar players instead of bassists. They could pick it up and fill in that low end. And you can see that the two of them use the Bass VI at different points in time in the Get Back documentary. It's really cool. Peter Green in the early days of Fleetwood Mac was seen playing these from time to time. But for my taste, the band that really found the niche to use this not as a bass replacement, but as a tool to add a truly unique sonic element to their sound was The Cure. Now, I've been a big fan of The Cure since late high school, early college days, and I'm dating myself a bit here, but I remember from listening to those records like Disintegration, for example, many of those songs like Pictures of You, had these really haunting melody, like these single note melodic lines in it, and I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what instruments they were using to create that. It sounded too high for a bass and too low for a guitar, but I never really thought too deeply about how they were doing it until I went to see The Cure in concert, and I think it must have been 93, 94, something along those lines. And I saw Robert Smith playing. He's clearly playing the melody line, and he was holding an instrument that I didn't recognize. Now, I recognized it as a Fender from the headstock, and I thought from the body, it looked like a Jaguar of some sort. But the neck was a lot longer, and the upper bout was different. And I'm like, what in the world is that? And so, with a little bit of investigating, I found out that it was, in fact, this thing called the Bass VI. And it just so happened, right around that time frame, Fender Japan issued what I believe was the first official reissue of the Bass VI, and I just had to have it. And I bought this new at that time, and I've had it ever since. And one of the things I think is really cool is that I get a sense that the popularity of this instrument has gone up a lot in recent years. In fact, Fender's done several different runs of reissues. I think they did a pawn shop series, and I think Squier still currently makes a Bass 6 that you can buy, and there's now a lot of aftermarket you know, bridges and pickups and tremolo systems that can you know, make some improvements over the original Fender design. But I have loved this instrument for a long time, and I just think it's really cool to see it kind of growing in popularity. Anyway, back to the Cure. How they would tend to use it, right, is not as a replacement for the bass. You'd still have, you know, Simon Gallup playing the 4-string bass. Typically, he played one of those big Gibson Thunderbirds, right? And then you'd have so that's like at the very, you know, low end, right, playing the, you know, the bass line. And then there's a guitar part doing something in the, you know, kind of the upper register of the guitar, and that creates a space in the middle for an instrument to fill, not with a bass line pattern and not with a guitar pattern, but something like a repeating melody, and it meshed so well with, you know, Robert's vocals and his vocal melody. So I'll give you a quick example of how the Cure used this in one of their songs. This is from Pictures of You off the Disintegration record. It's a really simple melodic line, but it's just so effective, and with the chorus and the delay, it just adds kind of a haunting quality to it. So when I'm working on a song, I frequently find myself trying to find ways to work this into the arrangement. I just think it has such a unique sonic character to it. It can be used in so many different ways, whether it's just, you know, you can just strum chords and mix that very, you know, low in the mix, but it just adds a richness, and that's a sonic area that neither the bass or the guitar is occupying. Or you could try to create those little, you know, melody lines in that sort of style of the Cure, right? It's just such a fun instrument, and I'm a big believer that different instruments affect how you play and what you play and what you write. If I were to pick up a 4-string bass or pick up my P bass, I'm not going to create those same types of things, because obviously I've got 2 more strings. The neck is a lot thinner in terms of, narrower in terms of its width. I can do a lot of things on this guitar that I can't do on a 4-string bass, but I'm also going to play and create different pieces than I would on a guitar, because it just has a very different sonic character to it. You're typically not going to play like strum big full chords, right? So like, for example, this is just a B minor chord. There's just too much going on. There's too much low end. There's too much frequencies kind of like, you know, knocking into each other. So I would play that differently. Instead of playing that full chord, I would play more like a little triad. That make sense? Rather than... So you play it differently than you would a guitar or a bass, and I find myself creating things that I wouldn't otherwise create, and then I look for ways to work those into the arrangement and into the mix. So I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you get the chance to, I hope you get inspired to get your hands on one of these, because they're just so much fun. It's just a different animal. You learn to play it a different way, and you have to adapt your style and your EQing and your mixing and everything to what this instrument has to offer. But the Squier ones are really cool, and they're very affordable. I think they're around $500, maybe a little bit less. So really cool options out there for you if you get your hands on one. I hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.